The Academic Staff Union of Universities has suspended its 8-month strike. The decision was made after an emergency meeting at the Comrade Festus Iyayi National Secretariat, University of Abuja, on Thursday. That's today, 13th of October. The press release said, quote, even with the acknowledgement that the issues that caused the strike still being prevalent because of the appeals by the President and Commander-in-Chief of the Armed Forces, as well as the Speaker of the House, Femi Gbadagba-Mamila, and due to these interventions and in recognition of the efforts of other well-meaning parties, ASUU has resolved to suspend the strike action embarked upon on the 14th of February 2022. Consequently, all members of ASUU have been directed to resume all services hitherto withdrawn with effect from 12 noon, Friday, 14th October 2022. Nasir El-Rufai, the governor of Kaduna State, says the federal government should privatize the oil and gas sector before it brings the country to its knees. Speaking at CAD-Invest, an economic summit in Kaduna on Thursday, he pretty much said the following, which we summarize here. The federal government has failed in every metric on oil and gas. The NNPCL Limited has not remitted up to even 20,000 naira to the Federation account, and the government should sell everything in the oil and gas sector. Joining us to discuss further, Seyi Omidiora, who is an analyst at Financial Derivatives Company Limited. Seyi, you're welcome. Good morning to you. Let's start with this big news with ASUU. What do you make of this suspension of the strike?
Well, I mean, basically, it's a case of the problem still being there because, I mean, as it was said during the press release, that they are simply resuming their activities because of the pleas by the president and, I mean, all concerned stakeholders. You know, it raises the question now about how, I mean, universities should be financed in Nigeria. I mean, should the federal government be subsidizing university tuition costs, or should that be the problem of the universities themselves, which means the federal government being hands-off and the universities financing their own operations, which means tuition costs will go all the way up. But what the implications of that will be for, I mean, prospective students and even, I mean, current students of universities, federal universities, is that with tuition costs going up, it's going to, I mean, more or less segregate a significant proportion of the university population, and you will see that many people who are even struggling to pay the tuition costs as they are today won't be able to afford them anymore. And it now brings up the question of financing. Student loans, should it be something we should consider in Nigeria? But then again, if you are considering student loans, someone will have to front load that cost. Who is going to front load that cost is the question to ask. Then another thing is, I mean, it's more or less like you taking a payment or a promise that you will pay back in the future. But then again, what jobs are there to pay off those costs? So those are some of the things we need to look at, and it's more or less like a cyclical problem. So we have to go back to the macros. We'll basically have to improve the economy so that, I mean, providers of labor will have sufficient demand, or more or less there will be sufficient supply of jobs to make sure that these graduates will have something to go into to be able to repay those loans.
The equivalent of ASUU in Kenya, professors there are asking for a 3-fold increase in tuition over in Kenya. They have a student loan system there. Quickly, I want to get your thoughts on Governor El-Rufai's comments on the NNPCL, saying they've been a disaster. They're going to bring the country down to its knees. Everything should be sold. The commercialization doesn't mean anything. What did you make of his comments at CAD-Invest?
It's an interesting one, but then again, we have to look at the historical performance of things the government has, I mean, been hands-off on. And I mean, the most prevalent one, the one that comes to mind, is the telecom sector. And we see exactly how Nitel was sold off, and I mean, independent or private institutions like MTN and Econet way back in 2001, 2002 came into the country, and we have seen how the telecom sector has grown substantially since that time. Before then, Nitel was, I mean, a very, very sketchy organization, and we have seen exactly how the telecom sector has grown substantially since Nitel's exit. Now, going back to the NNPC thing, we see how it transitioned, quote unquote, into a private organization.
A commercial entity, right?
Commercial entity, yes. How the new NNPC Limited will no longer make FAC remittances and will more or less have to pay taxes like every other organized private institution in Nigeria under KAMA. Now, I mean, when we consider all of these things, we need to look at how this will be handled in terms of, okay, transfer of assets, for instance, there is no it's still pretty opaque what sorts of assets will be transferred to this new NNPC Limited. The ministers of finance as well as ministers of petroleum are supposed to handle this transfer of assets. Things like the OPL and OML, there's still considerable government interest in them. And of course, these are revenue generating assets for NNPC, and they need to be transferred to the NNPC Limited now as it is. But I mean, everything is still pretty sketchy up in the air.
El-Rufai says sell everything. Sell everything, step out, give it to the private sector like Nitel. We're out of time. What do you make of that? Should we sell everything? Because all this transfer of assets and all this other stuff, the opaqueness, the this, the that, he just said sell it all. Sell it all, get out of the way, give it to the private sector. It's just, yeah.
Well, OLX sell it, yeah. Well, I mean, it's a case of we need to see exactly how other institutions have managed to, that the government has sold, have performed. And I mean, historically, they have performed pretty well.
Yeah,
so,
like Nitel.
I mean, we would say,
Seyi Omidiora,
sell it, yeah.
Great stuff. I was just saying we had the time, but I discussed this a whole lot more. Analyst with Financial Derivatives Company Limited, thank you so much for joining us. Appreciate your time.